All right, good. Okay, welcome everybody. Today I have my friend Josh Caspian here. We're just going to chat a little bit about in-ear monitors, and hopefully by the end of this video, we can all understand a little bit more on how to get a better mix in our monitors, so it feels like we're actually playing good music. But you have to be good to have good music in your ears.
Yeah, that's the thing.
But yeah, so before we start, Josh, can you introduce yourself a little bit? Where do you work? What do you do? Who you are? And something interesting about yourself.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'm Josh. As you said, I'm the audio director for Village Church here in Surrey. I've been here for 5 years, started as a volunteer and just mixing monitors. Actually, that was my introduction to Village Church. Actually, my real introduction to Village Church was applying for the role of front of house. And on my first evaluation, I bombed horribly. It was so bad. Didn't get called back, but I didn't panic and I didn't run away. And they're like, you know what? Wasn't great, but you're a great guy. You're working hard. And despite it being a bit of a tragedy, your character says a lot and we'd like to keep you around and we'll train you up. And so we'll start you in monitor. So that's actually how I got started at Village Church, but I've been here for 5 years, started there, started mixing front of house, then moved up. And now I'm the director. So I oversee front of house for our main recording campus and our live campus at the Bell Theater. And I also oversee all of our front of house engineers who are either on staff, volunteer, contract, anything like that for our other live expressions, whether that's at Langley, our youth, our collective, young adults, retreats, as well as I provide all of the mixing for the cinema sites that are now across BC and slowly the country. So I mix in surround sound and I also do the online mixing. So now that everybody's doing this online thing and we'll continue to do that post-pandemic. Do studio mixing, live mixing, anything audio music. That's my game. If it's not audio or if it's audio, not music, that's less my game. I don't like that so much. It kind of kills my soul. Corporate AV is not my cup of tea. I've said to many friends, if you give me enough corporate AV gigs, it'll kill me and it'll be on my tombstone. It'll be like my obit, like death by corporate. Interesting thing about myself. Ooh, I don't know. I have a sun allergy. How about that one? That's a weird one. I have a genetic UV light allergy on my back only. Super weird. Yeah, passed down through my dad's side. Don't know what to do about it, but move on.
Gotta wear a t-shirt, I guess.
Yeah, wear a t-shirt all the time, lots of sunscreen, live in a dark cave, no lights,
When perfect fit for audio.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Totally. So good. So good. Thanks, Josh. How long have you been mixing now in total?
I have been mixing professionally for, I'd say 6. I was doing it before I came to Village, just taking one-off paid gigs, doing freelance stuff, a little bit here and there, and volunteering a lot. But in total, I've been doing it about 10 or 12 years, maybe a little bit more, actually. I got into mixing actually because I was a worship leader. I started leading worship when I was 17 at the Salvation Army. And it was really cool. And I was really blessed with the opportunity to do that so young, to lead my entire congregation. But I lived in Langley and my church was in Burnaby. So I'd have to SkyTrain all the way out. I wasn't driving or anything. And I'd show up early, turn all the sound stuff on. So I had to figure out how to turn on the board and kind of do a rough monitor mix on Wedges and kind of run a rehearsal. Yeah. And I would leave for 5 minutes and pray before service started. And the sound guy would show up and be like, it's too loud. And he'd turn all the wrong knobs and kill my monitor mix and kill my soul. And now I'm like leading frustrated. And it was just one of those situations that I was like, you know what, I'll just do sound because I don't want anybody else to have to put up with that, because I knew what it was like to be on the platform trying to lead people. And your main job is to connect people to the Spirit and to be attentive to the Spirit and what God wants to do, and be listening and leading and reading the room. And if you're worried about, I can't hear myself, or that sounds horrible, or something is overtaking your mix, you're completely distracted and not as well equipped to do your job. So that was my transition over to audio, because I just didn't want anyone else to put up with that. And then I
Mhm.
very quickly realized, oh, this is a lot of fun. I don't have to play one instrument. I can play all the instruments
Yeah.
while also empowering worship leaders. And that's been my passion ever since.
It was so good. So good. So I've had the privilege of having Josh on front of house for conferences and also on monitors.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always been a blast. It's amazing to work with you always. And so I thought, what a great way maybe for us to learn as, you know, as the worship team here at Life Church for us. I thought I'd reach out and just see if we can grab a couple of pointers and a couple of tips. And if you can teach us just a little bit about the things that you know on how to get a better in-ear monitor mix. So we've been on in-ears for a couple of years now at our church, but just recently we swapped over to stereo in-ears, which is great. It's pretty amazing. It's a night and day difference between mono and stereo, and hopefully we can chat about that as well. But basically, at our church, we use the new Behringer Wing console, and we have Shure wireless backs, and some of the band is wired monitors, also a stereo option for that, which is great. And so one thing that we've found is it's really hard to do the transition from live wedges to in-ear monitors. And not everyone is used to it. A couple of us are used to in-ear monitors. We've been playing with it for a long time, and others have not. And so, you know, we've been trying to teach the importance of being patient and like trying to understand what you need to hear. But it is really hard. And so maybe today we can dive into some pointers and tips, how we can really get that to work with us and how we can hopefully fall in love with in-ear monitors. Because like you said earlier, it is the way that we hear things. If it doesn't sound good in our ears, you're going to lead different because you are going to feel different. You're totally going to, you know, connect with the people differently, or you're going to end up taking one ear out or both ears out. Hopefully not.
Hopefully not.
Yes.
That's the gig is over if both ears are out.
It's done. It's done. And you move forward to just hear over the front of house speakers.
Yeah, the PA. Yikes.
The PA. There we go. So, Josh, as a sometimes as front of house engineer, do you also mix monitors from front of house?
I do. Yes.
Okay.
Actually, that's my main thing. We at the Bell Center, we used to have it split, and I was just the monitor engineer, and I would work with the front of house engineer to run line check because we would have a shared gain. So one of us had to set the preamp, and the other just had to kind of follow along, wait for everything to get set, and then you can you're off you go, right? But we needed to split up the team because there was only two of us really mixing at the time, and as we expanded our sites, we needed to, you know, I needed to be somewhere else. So we actually collapsed and started doing monitors from front of house. And so that's our main gig. And that's what I do regularly. That's always actually my first priority when I'm getting a mix going is making sure that the band can hear properly, because that's more important in my mind at front of house. Even for me, it's super important for the musicians. But for me, I feel less confident that I'm going to get the mix I need for the congregation if the band can't hear themselves, because they're not going to be able to, like you said, perform, right? They won't be able to play correctly, and it totally changes the way they play. So it actually benefits us both if I focus on that first.
Great. So for us, we have monitor control through our iPhones. So we don't typically have our front of house do all the monitors for everyone. Obviously, he is there and he can adjust anything. And he can set it up. So we always have a base mix that we start with. But then each team member has the ability to mix their own monitors from the app. Right. And sometimes it's annoying, you know, it connects and disconnects. So there's pros and cons to it. But what are the basics that we have to start with? Before we go there, I'll just tell you, we have just our team, what it looks like. We usually have a drummer, a bass, electric guitar, keys, and 2 or 3 vocals. And one of them will be playing acoustic guitar. Then we also have click and cues and backing tracks that we use. So
pretty full setup, but also
pretty
very
full setup.
kind of standard.
Yes. So I'd like to see and just touch quickly on like maybe each instrument. What are things that we can look for each of those? But let's just start with the fundamentals of starting to set up your in-ear mix. So I got my pack. I plugged my headphones in. My Shure SE215s or my very expensive 64 audio custom ears or my Amazon special $30 headphones. All different things. They're all going to sound different, but
they are.
I plugged it into the pack. Where do I start? What should I be doing first?
That's a great question. And I think it's actually a really cool point to bring up. Like, yes, everyone does have different monitors. And it's something I'm very well aware of when I'm mixing monitors. I have my 64 customs always, and I'm very used to them. And I listen to them a lot. As you can see, I have my little dongle on them because I want to understand my in-ears. If I'm going to be mixing for somebody, I want to know those in-ears in and out. So whatever headphone you're listening to, it's just important that it's the same thing that you listen to everything to. So you have a good understanding of what music should sound like. If you don't, it's not really great to be switching all the time unless that's something that, you're doing intentionally. If you're going to be doing it, there needs to be a why. And I think that applies to everything that we're doing. And I'll lead into that with the rest of it. But you want to know what music sounds like, right? And that's what we're doing here. We are making music. So when you plug in, for me, the thing that I always focus on first is, making sure that you can monitor in confidence so that you can hear yourself. If you can't hear yourself, it's going to be a very difficult time. So I always suggest to people to, if you have your own control or whatever, bring your fader up to unity, meaning 0, if you can see specific levels. But make sure that that's the thing that is kind of like forward in the mix is the forefront and is at a comfortable volume. If you're to turn up a little, it's not going to crush you. And if you turn down a little bit, it's still going to be the main thing that you hear, right? A good little listening test and practice, say if you're in your car or something, is turn the radio down right until you're like, I can just barely hear it. I'm starting to lose it right underneath the sound of the road in the car. The thing that you'll always hear, the first thing that you're going to hear, the main thing is always the vocal. And I think that's the main thing for everybody. Even if you're not the vocalist, it's important to hear that thing because they're going to be communicating and leading. It's not just the music side, but they're going to be usually running rehearsal. So if you're a vocalist, that's super important. But if you're not a vocalist, it's super important. So I bring that thing up to unity. And that's sort of my base level. I know that some people start to bring up click and stuff first, but in my experience, I found that if you bring that up, you've kind of given yourself a wonky start in that you don't really know what that reference point is. How loud is that click in comparison to the rest of the mix? And is that really the most important thing? Maybe, maybe not. I think it is very important, but I'd say that the most important thing is that hearing yourself and hearing someone that's going to communicate. So I'd bring those two things up first. So if you're a bass or guitar or something, start with your lead vocalist or MD or whoever's going to be communicating the most up at 0 and yourself kind of at 0. Those are your main players. After that, when I'm teaching other people, where to start with things, I sort of ask them the question of, like what makes up music? Because that's to me that's what we're doing here, but it's important to ask the why for everything that we're doing, right? So if we're making music, it's like, well, we're storytelling, so we need to hear the vocal, we need to hear the melody, the thing that helps us remember that story. And then there's usually something kind of like a harmonic backdrop, something that's giving the context to that melody. The melody has something to relate to. Then the next thing is rhythm. We need to kind of figure out how are we going to stay consistent as we tell that story and we sing that melody. So there has to be some sort of consistency of meter, how we measure the meter, right? So if you do those, if you evaluate those things, you can kind of simply break them down to 3 main elements. So you need your lead vocal, a harmonic backdrop. The most simple one people often think of is keys, because it carries the most, kind of stuff going on. It has a very full range. It's got your bass, mids, and trebles. it's a wide range of frequencies and gives a nice thing for the vocal to sit on top of, in a sense. But sometimes that can actually be more complicated than it needs to be, especially if you've got somebody with fancy fingers who has zero chill. They like to just play constantly. So, that vocalist, that melody needs to be able to have a reference for the pitch. What am I singing off of? What is the chord? Surprisingly, what you can get away with is not a guitar or a bass, or a piano, but is actually the bass, because often they're just playing the root, and we can imply the chord. Our brain will fill in the gaps and keeps it very simple, and also is very diverse. It's very far away from the vocal sonically, pitch wise and frequency wise. So it can actually add a lot of confidence to a vocalist to know, okay, what's the chord I'm singing off of? That is, granted, your bass player is playing the right notes and giving them that right thing. What am I singing off of, but also not getting in my way? Because sometimes putting the piano up can actually bury the vocal, and now you're having a hard time. Same with guitar, even more so, I'd say, with guitar than piano, because electric guitar and acoustic guitar sit in the same sonic frequencies as the vocalist. So I always try to start with something like that, either bass or piano, something to give me a volume reference of what's comfortable in my ears and is also going to give me a context of the music. Then the next thing is your rhythmic elements. Now, here's where I would skip past drums just for a second. Now I'm going to go to click, because that is going to actually be, it's going to be dictating to the band what the meter is. It's telling us the time signature. It's telling the emphasis of the groove. Usually the click track has a more pronounced downbeat. So it's going to keep things very clear on where we are in the song with the bar. And in most of the time, if I'm putting up click up to whatever is comfortable, I'm going to put the guide sort of in the same. I'm just going to tie those together and raise those two. I have faders in front of me, so if you're wondering what I'm looking at, I'm very used to that. I usually just bring those up together, and then it's very easy to kind of like bump one up or down per person. So that's usually where I start. So yourself, say you're a guitarist, bring that up to unity. Get a vocal or somebody who's going to be communicating in there very, very quickly, because you don't want to be pulling your ear out constantly. Sorry, like, what part of the song are we running now? That's not awesome. That's slow and inefficient. Then give yourself some context for the song, bass or keys, something like that, to kind of like round it out, bring some warmth, some fullness, and also give you some sonic context, of what's coming next. And then the rhythm, bringing in something to keep it moving. Because if you start with drums, most of the time it ends up being like really loud, and now everything else has to get loud, and there's only so much room in a mix. And if I've learned anything, it's that if everything's big, then nothing is big.
Mm-hmm. That's good. That's good. So is it necessary to put if we have tracks going, we have 4 pads in the tracks, there might be guitars and synth bass, and it's already a massive mix. Is it necessary to have tracks in our monitors?
I don't think it's always necessary. It sometimes can be. It's always case dependent. But usually tracks is something that I start kind of low. Yeah. And I'll feather into taste, because I'm going to say this is the right way. It's not the right way. There's no right and wrong, but in my experience, it has been more beneficial. And so I'll say it's right. It's more beneficial for the context of everything if the band is actually carrying the music and the tracks are an ornament to it that are enhancing it. If ever you've been in a situation where the mix is track heavy and dependent, as soon as that computer goes down, which is not as quick to reboot as a human being,
so small,
everything becomes this big, and the curtain drops and everybody looks around like, what happened? It's a disaster. I've made that mistake in my younger years of just being track heavy, and you're like, yeah, this mix slaps. And then Ableton dies and you're like, oh gosh, I suck. And it blew a hole in the ship. So it's a disaster. So I'd say, no, it's not super important. And I think bringing up something like pads is a great example of something that's nice for a mix, but is not essential. It is not always essential. You got to prioritize things. It's about less is more for monitors.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Maybe for if you're MDing, for our team, we have a couple guys MDing. The tracks might be important in their ears to feel if they can't see the roadmap on whether it's a computer or iPad that they're running tracks from. Maybe hearing the tracks when we do go off, that context maybe to hear it. Maybe it's important for the MD to know those things.
Very important. Yeah.
And so maybe you can just speak into that as each person has their individual role, like you mix for that certain role. So if I'm a vocalist, I'm going to mix according to what I need as a vocalist.
Yes, exactly.
Sometimes I play guitar and sing, and so I have to accommodate both. But being a background vocalist or the lead singer or the MD or lead guitars or drums, you kind of have to mix for that specific, for your role in the band.
Totally.
Right? So what I've seen a lot of times is that we don't understand what a mix should sound like. And so I appreciate what you brought up earlier, just having the in-ears, like having the headphones that you are going to use on stage, use those to listen to music, with those during the week. Maybe listen to the worship songs that you are doing that week.
Absolutely.
Listen to your set list on those monitors, on your in-ears. So that you can know what it should feel like. And obviously it's going to be different when we play, but it's a good start because it's we expect it to sound nice, but then we plug our in-ears in and it just sounds muddy and it sounds,
too thick.
I can't hear myself.
Too much going
thick.
on. Yeah.
You just want to turn it up too high. And so one way, what are a couple of ways that we can clean up our in-ear mix ourselves? And so keep in mind that we now have stereo capabilities with our monitor. So just for one, can we maybe talk about both mono and stereo?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, well, first of all, I am a huge proponent of stereo always. In our situation, people have often asked me like, hey, can we get, 3 more people on platform this week? And I'm kind of hoping this thing. And I tell them, I can do it. I am willing to do it. I cannot recommend it in the sense that the requirement to put those people on platform means that I'm going to have to break apart stereo mixes and turn them into mono. And I do not advise it. Our nose is in mono, our tongue's in mono, our ears and our eyes are in stereo for a reason. God made us, he created our eyes in a way to give us depth in the field that we see. And it's the same thing sonically. We need depth to have a proper understanding of our surroundings. And for music, that depth is what gives us clarity in the mix. It helps add separation from certain elements. And also creates like a front to back image, and it just leads to a much more pleasing, more natural experience, even as someone in a congregation singing, you're hearing stuff coming off the stage, down from the PA, the people beside you, behind you, that envelopment, that entire surrounding that is wrapping around you is what's taking you and helping you get this spiritual encounter, right? It's leading you into something that is bigger than yourself, because it's not just, something, it's not like looking at a 2D thing. It's, wow, this is all of my brothers and sisters singing around me. That's a powerful thing. I don't think it's by accident that God designed us that way. And that's the reason why we mix in surround sound for our theaters, is because we want people to have that envelopment, right? But even in stereo, I think that's really, really, really helpful. So if you are working in mono, it's certainly more tricky, and you have to be a little bit more judicious with your moves and what's required. But I'm going to give a bit of a weird trick here to help gain some more clarity when you're building your mix, especially if you can do this on your phone. Start your mix in mono, even though you have stereo capabilities. Try panning everything up into the middle, even your stereo elements, your keys and stuff, collapse them to mono. What that does is it actually reinforces the frequencies that are doubling. So if you have a lot of low mid stuff heavy in like a piano or a guitar, when it's wide, it doesn't feel so thick. But when it's super narrow, all that low mid frequency starts to build up and doubles in power. So now you have a representation of what that guitar or keyboard is really feeling like in your mix. And when you balance that fader, it's not simply just volume, but you're playing with the frequency balance, our perception of that frequency, if it feels too bassy or feels more trebly in a sense. So if you needed more treble in your mix, you could add more guitar or overheads to get the cymbals in there, right? It's not just about grabbing the EQ knob and sending it up 10 dB. You're using the balances to EQ your mix. So start everything in mono, build it so that you can hear everything. You're getting a representation. It'll be very clear when something is muddying it up. And don't be afraid to push it too far, take it down, feel out what the tolerance is. You know, how much wiggle room do I have with this thing? Send it up too much. Okay, not enough. Somewhere down in here. You can err on the side of, you know, cautiousness. If you're not sure, just bring it down, whatever you think it should be, just bring it down 3 or something like that. And then once you got everything in there, start to move things wider, start to pan out elements that don't need to take up priority. Your center image is what's the most important. And it also has the most power. If you think about it, if you pan something into the center, I'm looking at looking into my speakers, but it's the same with headphones. You pan something into the center. I mean, there's no speaker there. So what you're actually doing is giving the element the authority to be in both speakers equally. And that gives us the appearance of being in the middle. So if it is going to have the power of both speakers, it should have the priority of both speakers. So a vocal should be in the center. Click track should be in the center. A guide or an MD should probably be in the center. Guitars, probably not. Piano, probably not. Pads, tracks, synths, leads, shakers, tambos, anything that is kind of auxiliary, start to move it away. Oh, I keep hitting this mic. I'm so sorry. I keep forgetting it's here. Start to move it away and don't be afraid to go far with it. So guitars, try panning them all the way left and all the way right. Give yourself a lot of spread, push them out to the edges of the mix or to like the outside of your head in a sense. You know, if it's like your vocals here, start to move things out further and further to wrap around you as far as you can. But I would keep things like kick, snare, bass, click, and vocal right up the middle. Those are going to be what carries the music. The kick and snare are telling you the groove, the bass is implying the chord, and the vocal is telling you what we're singing about. So keep that stuff focal, and then everything else start to move it away.
That's great. Thank you. What is the difference between if I have, for instance, my guitar, so my acoustic guitar, maybe I want to pan that to one of my ears.
Yeah.
Why should I pan it all the way to left, or what happens when I only pan it a little bit, 30% to the left?
Right.
What does that do for me?
Well, it can often open up more of the frequency space, like I said, in the center. But sometimes it helps to just be like, okay, well, this is kind of important. You know, think about the pan knob as another fader, right? It really is just a fader between left and right. It's just a slider, right? So it's like, well, it's kind of important, but maybe it's not the most important. So maybe I'll just move it 30%. But if you are stereo, like tracking in a sense, or you have stereo elements like an electric guitar is actually truly in stereo, or the keyboard is often truly in stereo. If you push that all the way out, you generally won't lose it if you have a complementary left and right side. Now, if you had an electric guitar, just one electric guitar, panning it all the way left or all the way right might actually do this sort of thing to you. And you'll start to like drift off to one side. So you may have to compensate in volume. So that's sort of that wiggle room. You start to play with those things, maybe just a little bit to the left. Okay. And now I'll just tuck it down a little bit. And if I go all the way to the left, well, now there's nothing else really out there competing with that because the other guitar is all the way on the right. So this can be loud and clear, but not necessarily as loud. So you can start to actually get more front to back depth in terms of volume and width.
Great. So if I understand that correctly, if I have the guitar and it's in the center, and maybe I just want it a little bit a little bit more back in the mix behind my vocals. I don't necessarily have to take the volume down, but I could move it over a little bit, and that will technically, it'll sound quieter if I move it a little bit. And
sometimes
then
it can actually sound louder.
Okay.
Sometimes you can find little, we call them pan pockets. Sometimes there's like, if your overheads are wide and your keyboards are wide and your tracks are wide, everything's all the way out here and the vocals here. Well, what's in this range? So sometimes you can actually play with it and just start panning things. And weirdly enough, I don't know why, maybe it's the frequency range of our ears and we got damage in one and not in the other. I don't know. But sometimes you can find pan pockets where you can slide it around, 30% left, 40% left. Okay, let's try 30, 40% right. Whoa, jumps out. It'll actually pop a little bit extra. You're like, wow, okay, that's a lot more clarity without depending on volume or EQ or anything like that.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. So it's being patient and finding, not just going 90 degrees, not just like pulling it all the way. So like just move it. The app that we do use is very clear on it. You can actually adjust the width of the signal and pan it. So so with that, we can just grab, it's for us just grabbing the middle and sliding it over, but then seeing, like, listen when you do it, not just, don't just look at it.
Yeah.
Totally. I love that.
Yeah. I found that things like shaker and tambourines are great to like offset in like a 30%, 40% against like a hi-hat in the overheads. Cause even if you stereo pan overheads, what you're doing with that stereo pan is with them over, you're actually starting to see the full image. You'll be like, oh, there's the hat, there's the rack tom, the ride cymbal, the floor tom, and the crash. You'll hear that kind of windshield wiper thing going on as he goes across. So sometimes it's really nice to find a pan pocket on an opposing side to balance something like a hi-hat that might just kind of be like sticking out a little too much. It's like, well, here's another element that might actually give me some cool left to right rhythm and help it feel like I'm not like, my left, somebody's turned up my left in-ear and my right in-ear is quiet. It just kind of like takes you off to one side.
Yeah, great. Okay. What if my mix sounds a bit muddy? Now, we don't have the ability to EQ each channel from our mobile app. We can only pan. We do have the ability to adjust a separate EQ for monitor sends on the console itself. Cool. But it's per channel. It's not per channel per monitor. So for, let's say I'm on vocals, I can set EQ for front of house for the PA. And then there's also a 3-band EQ for any bus send that I can do.
Right. So you can EQ the aux send to your monitor.
Yes. So correct. My vocal channel, I can put like a high pass on, and which I should. So I can have a high pass on my vocals, and that high pass will affect everyone's monitors, but it won't affect front of house.
Right.
EQ.
And that's what I deal with when I mix front of house from monitors as well. It's no different. And that's something that sometimes I play with and sometimes I don't. But yeah, it has to be some collaboration and communication between myself and the musician about what's needed for the mix and what's also needed for their in-ears. And sometimes I don't get my way, and that's okay. Sometimes, what's more important is the performing. And if it's really making them struggle, I will find another way to make it work. And sometimes that's just a fader move. Sometimes it's just, I can't have it where I want it, so I'll have to tuck it a little lower. But mud and EQ with an aux send there is a possibility there to do a little bit of pre-shaping in a sense. So oftentimes, actually most of the time, the instrumentation, very raw, like the raw tones coming off of everything tends to be very mid forward. If you think about your frequency as like a flat line, you got your bass and your treble and everything's running across. Most things tend to look kind of like this. They're kind of mid heavy. So you might be able to ease that thickness and muddiness by either pulling the mids down a little bit on the aux send, just like if you have EQ with a actual frequency control, somewhere between 200, 250, 300, somewhere in there, maybe up to 500, depending. But usually that 300 is usually a gross area. Nobody likes 300.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of that hip hop thing. It's like a big R&B Motown. Like every track they mixed in that era was just kill 300 because they just they wanted shine, right? And the thing that was getting in front of the clarity and that shine and polish on the mix was just how thick the low mids were. So usually you can just tuck that just a hair. If you take it too far, it'll feel very gutless. And you have to remember, like, it's not channel dependent. You're affecting everybody. So it might be like great to pull a little bit out of the keyboards that are a little too thick, but now your vocal feels thin. So it's a balance. And when you make that move, don't just think about what you're gaining. Ask yourself what you might be losing, and listen critically and feel out, okay, what's the win here and what's the loss? Because then maybe the alternative is not pulling the mids down. It might just be boosting the highs and the lows a little bit, just giving them a little, to kind of get them up and out of the low mid buildup.
Yeah, great. So that's more for front of house mixer that will deal with those kind of stuff. Front of house.
You can ask for that. Yeah, you can ask for that from your engineer and just be like, hey, can you help me out a little bit? Let me know. I think a great thing for anybody is like having somebody that's open to that kind of communication. I think that's so key. But also ask yourself and the engineer, like, hey, I'm feeling it's a little mucky. How's my tone coming to front of house? Because perhaps you need to move a microphone, or you need to make an EQ adjustment on your amp or your pedal board or whatever. And something like that is not a channel EQ and it's not a mix EQ. It's like, hey, is this too thick coming to you? Because if I can fix it on my end, maybe I'll just, do a little bit here, you do a little bit there, and we'll both be happier. Yeah.
And that fixes it most of the time for everyone in their monitors. Okay, great. So sometimes we don't really know what we are missing, and we don't know what we want. And so I know that there can be a big communication problem between the musicians on stage and either the person doing front of house or doing your monitors. So are there any like terms that you as a monitor mixer or front of house would like us musicians to know? Like because what we will tell you is like, my monitors don't sound good. I can't hear myself. And it sounds just all like I'm talking inside something. Right. And are there any terms that you would like appreciate us knowing as musicians when we talk to you or to our front of house?
That's a good question. I think that it's beneficial for both parties to have a universal language. I think that's what's most important. What the words are, I think, is less important as long as it's clear. Because I've had people who have asked me, they're like, man, it just feels like a little flat, but also like kind of sharp. And I'm like, those are musical terms to me. I don't know what that means. And it took me a minute to be like, okay, what could that? I was like, can I make it more purple for you at the same time? Like, I don't know. I don't know what that means. But when I thought about it, I was like, okay, flat. What does flat mean to me? And I can interpret that and I can make a bunch of moves, but that might not be your understanding of flat. So I think the most important thing is when you're talking to someone about it and you're asking for assistance, it's not just hey, I'm experiencing this, figure it out. I don't think that it's a win for anyone. So I would say it's better to express your experience more than to give them your diagnosis with a term. Sometimes that term is helpful. Mud is something that is kind of, everybody's picked up on that. What does that actually mean? There's no actual dirt in the mix. Who knows what that means? What that has meant though, is that it's like, okay, it feels thick. Mud is a little too thick. I can think of some strategies to get rid of that, but perhaps it's not in the range that vocalist or that person is thinking of. So it's, open up the communication line and share the experience. It's hearing that, like, I feel like I'm in my head like this. It feels very claustrophobic. That can be a term. It feels very dry. If you're looking for reverb, dry is sort of the opposite in a sense. Trying to think of some other like cliche ones. Mud is thickness. Tin, I've never really understood tinny. I don't think I've ever heard a tin can in my life, so I'm not sure what that means. It's like shrill but not shrill. You know what I mean? Like it's like right
it's
below
all up here.
right below shrill. Shrill is a good one because I think everyone understands. Like it's a little barky, edgy, bright, trashy, shrill. Those are all kind of the same like ouch frequencies. That's something you can say is like it kind of hurts. Like it's kind of it's like loud but not loud.
Yeah, but it hurts my ear. Like when I go high, it hurts my ears.
Totally, those sort of things. And hopefully he doesn't say, "We'll just turn it down," because that's not good communication or respect. But yeah, share your experience. What does it feel like to you, and then we can move forward from there because that's more clear the roadmap forward.
Okay, great. Thank you. So for our team members, be clear in like explaining what you are feeling. Like tell us, describe what you feel you are hearing. You don't need to have all the terms. You don't need to have all the technical stuff, but you can just tell us what you're experiencing. That's great. I love it.
And I think that's like, I want to take too much time here, but I think that's actually super good because it builds a relationship between you and the engineer, right? It builds a relationship. It's not just like, I'm feeling this, deal with it. Because that feels very standoffish on the receiving end. I don't want to experience that. I deal with it all the time, and I got thick skin, and I know I have an expectation that sometimes is going to happen. But I like to then dig deeper with that person and be like, what are you experiencing? And I want you to know I'm on your team, and I want you to know that I'm here to figure that out with you. So let's walk with it together. And that builds that trust and open communication so much better than, just kind of handing over a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. Great. Maybe last thing we can touch on here, and then we'll call it a day, is effects in monitors.
Yeah.
Kind of as a vocalist,
with dry and wet. Yeah.
Yeah. So you kind of led into that, but let's just talk about that a little bit. As a vocalist, usually we want reverb in our ears. Can I have a little bit more reverb? Yeah. And we always want that.
You can only have it if you ask for it with that voice. A little bit more reverb, please.
And sometimes, or most of the times, a lot of reverb is bad. It's horrible for your mix. You're going to go to ground zero. Like it's just going to fall down and be horrible, and you're going to hate your monitors. So we have the ability to introduce reverb, whichever effects we use for front of house, we can mix that into our monitors. We have vocal reverb, vocal delays on another channel. Then we have instrument reverbs, usually for piano and acoustic guitar sometimes goes in there. And then we have drum reverb. So we have those 4 channels. If I want my vocals to sound a little better,
quick question, are they mono effects or stereo effects?
They're stereo effects.
Okay, cool. Continue.
Yeah,
sorry.
They're stereo effects. Sometimes as a vocalist, I'd like to I don't want my vocals dry necessarily. I do want something. I just want to feel a bit of ambience. I want it to sit a little better. Right. But if I introduce too much reverb, then what happens, like my vocals takes a backseat, right? If I introduce too much reverb. And so is there some way that we can know what is good? Like, where is it good? Where is it not? Do I need delay in my ears? No, I probably not. Instrument reverb, maybe a little bit. Drum reverb, depending on what the reverb sounds like. Ours is just like a room reverb for the drums. But the main thing is usually vocal reverb. And so what is a good way to measure what is good? Like what is enough and what is too much? Right.
And I think the unfortunate answer is that it's different for each person because it's about how you're going to perform with it. Now, there is some advisable stuff though when you're doing it, and it comes back to the why, right? What's the reason that we add the reverb? The reason is because we do not like the feeling of being so claustrophobic with every instrument being direct fed straight into our skull. Like it is completely unnatural to plug a bass DI into our head. It's like that's essentially what we're doing, right? It's super weird and it feels very uncomfortable and can make us nervous. And when we're nervous, then we start to perform subpar, or we perform nervous, right? And we don't want to convey anxiety, and we don't want to be shaky on pitch and that sort of stuff. So the reason to add reverb is to help create space, right? To become drive it more closely to the experience of not having ears in and being on wedges and being able to hear the room, right? So the first thing I'd say is, if you have the capability to add a room mic or 2 room mics, it doesn't have to be fancy. It could be a 57 on either side of the stage. That can sometimes be more preferable to a reverb, because it'll help you get the feedback of the people singing back to you, and also add the space and dimension to your mix that helps you take a breath and realize I'm not, stuck, because it feels so awful to sing a note and feel like it's going to be this big thing, and then it goes and you can't even hear people. Like, it's awful. I totally get it. It's awful. So I would steer clear of delay. It can be a little distracting. That one's usually something that's kind of the extra juice for the front of house engineer to kind of sauce up a moment. I would stick with the main thing. It's like, if you're a vocalist, just worry about vocal reverb. If you're a guitarist, I wouldn't necessarily worry about vocal reverb. If you're going to add it in, do that late in the game when you already feel really good about your monitors, that you feel like everything's here. It's as clear as I can get it, and I'm happy. Let's see if we can add a little bit more to the experience and enhance the experience. But as a vocalist, yes, worry about your vocal reverb. And what I would do is bring it up until you start to hear it, and then go a little bit too far and be like, okay, now what you should be experiencing rather is, we talked about left to right kind of space. Well, there's also front to back space. Reverb is the appearance of depth. So bringing it up too much starts to actually drag your vocal backwards further into the mix. So it'll actually appear as though you've turned your vocal down closer into the mix of guitars and the sea of instruments underneath you, right? So bring it up until you can just start to hear it, and then maybe turn it down 3 and start there. That's a great place. So you've heard the depth. Now back it up just a hair, not a lot, just a hair, until you're like, okay, it's there. Or what you could do, this is a advanced move, and if you're willing to try this out, is ask your engineer to add something called pre-delay, if they have the ability to do that, is to actually give the reverb a bit of like a hold on, right? You're gonna hit the reverb, but it's gonna stay dry for a little bit, and then the reverb's gonna come on, and that's gonna give you more reverb, but help you stay out front for longer until you're kind of off the note, and then the reverb kind of starts to bloom underneath and behind you. So anywhere between 50 to 150, I don't know, you can go anywhere, but I usually land somewhere between 70 and 90 milliseconds and say, but careful not to prescribe, but just ask your engineer, hey, can you give a little pre-delay on the verb? It's sounding really nice, but it'd be nice if I could dry it up just a hair to stay present. I'd say that's a great place. And then for instruments, whatever is inspiring, I'd say just be careful of muddiness, too thick, and if the reverb's too long, whoops, again with the microphone, if it's too long, that's going to affect the way you play. You're going to come off notes differently and possibly out of time. You might be hanging on a little too long or cutting off a little too short, especially if it's going to a record and they're not recording that delay or that reverb. That can be less than desirable. And then the drum reverb, I don't know, whatever sounds saucy to you. That one's kind of easy. Drums are funny in that you can kind of push them and pull them in extreme ways, and they always sound awesome most of the time. So
yeah, that's good. Thank you. I love that reverb creates a dimension back and forth. Yes. Where panning to create space goes left and right, and so that's why I tend to
bass and your treble is your height, your front to back is your depth, your reverb and your space, and then you got your width. So you want to think about it as this cube that you can live within.
Yeah, that's great. So that then becomes my monitor mix becomes 3-dimensional and feels more natural. Like when I listen to a song, all the music that we listen to are mixed and mastered, and they all have some sort of stereo field images. So we're used to that, used to hearing that. So that's great.
And if you're
love that.
If you're not sure where to go, pick a song, any song that you like, get out a notepad and just write down all of the elements of the mix: drums, bass, guitars, keys, and start making notes and effects. I'd add effects on there, or tracks effects, you can lay it out and just ask what's the balance? Where is it pan wise? And what's the depth? What, is it further back or is it further forward? Is it punchy and dry, or is it a little set back and have a little bit more space around it? And start kind of picking up the cues of like, oh, this is how the pros kind of approach it. These aren't, tricks. It's fundamentals. It's little things of like knowing, oh, well, I seem to hear that Hillsong pans their acoustic guitars out here somewhere every time, no matter what song. It's probably a good guess, that you can probably put it out there, unless you have a different need for your in-ear, in which case make an adjustment for what you need to perform.
That's great. I love that. Thank you. So basically, when it comes to effects and monitors, get your mix first. And then bring the effects up to enhance, which is why we use effects in the first place, is to enhance. And so if we can all remember that, just do your mix and then you're probably just going to use vocal reverb, but just bring that up then to enhance your mix. So don't go too much so that your vocal seems to be quieter in your monitor, because then you're just going to want to bump that volume fader up again.
Totally.
And you'll start to hurt your ears because we're right here. We're so close. So
and you very quickly will run out of room, and then things will start to distort. So if I could give you any one tip, and if you're working on your own or with anybody else, is when you're performing, pay attention to what is the problem. Like, I can't hear it. Don't just say, oh, I need more of me. Start to ask yourself, okay, well, is it that I need more of me, or is something else actually too loud and is on top of me? You're going to get a way clearer mix and a way quicker mix by actually asking what needs to go down. And you'll have so much more space, so much more depth very, very quickly. And every person I've said, like, ask yourself what needs to be turned down, has always gotten their mix 3 times as fast as everyone else on the team when they've learned that trick and they go forward. And when they work with other engineers and in other environments, they said that was the best thing that you could have told me, is what needs to go away, and just taking one quick second, take a breath, listen, and then go, okay, acoustic guitar is on top of me. I got it. It's too much of that. Okay, cool. And you know what to attack. And then you have a roadmap. You've given yourself a roadmap of what to do.
So good. I love it. So first of all, we should get used to our in-ears, our headphones that we use. Listen to music through your phone or your laptop. Use those headphones to listen to music so we can know. Let's try and remember the left and right, the back and forth, and the up and down, 3-dimensional space of what we want to hear in our monitors. And just the basic fundamentals of music. Take notes when you listen to music on headphones. Write it down. You will benefit so much from it. Josh, thank you so much for teaching us. I do think we're going to have better monitors after listening to this and start implementing it. And it might not be the very first time we do it, but over a couple of weeks, as we start to introduce and remember all the things, and as we get used to it, we will end up with great sounding mixes where it's actually so inspiring to play, and you can stop thinking about what is happening in your ears and just let the music, just happen in your headphones, so that you can serve the church in that moment and be present with what God wants to do through you in that moment, and not be distracted by the stupid click or cues in my ears that calls me,
or the sea of BGVs that are not needed.
Yes,
that's one I will quickly add on. BGVs, push them out wide, whatever. Keep the lead always.
Yeah. So it's great for us. We're with having a small team right now, it's pretty easy. But as soon as we introduce more singers, and it's not that you don't like one or the other, it's not anything about that, but push the BGVs to the sides and they'll automatically go backwards in your mix. And Yeah, so always be kind, be open, to talk to the engineer to help you find what it is. Let's use the subtractive way of approaching things instead of adding. Let's just try and take away first, lower things that you can identify that is sticking out above you, and let's just enjoy what we do, and let's use inner monitors to our benefit. But let's work on this together so that we can get great mixes, so we can be confident on stage in playing our instruments and leading, and do whatever we need to do that morning, what God wants to do through us.
Yeah.
Great.
Josh, thank you so much. Glorify. Yeah. Yes.
You're amazing. This was great. Maybe we'll do one on front of house, and maybe we'll do a couple on instruments, or I don't know. This is so much fun. So
I'm down
I'd like
for whatever.
to do it again.
Yeah.
We love you, man. Bless you. And we'll talk soon.
Talk soon.
Cheers.